Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Ask Minister Yo podcast. I am so excited that you are here. Have you ever asked God to deliver you from something and then found yourself wanting to go right back to it? Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a habit. Maybe it was an environment that wasn't conducive for your spiritual growth. Maybe it was an addiction. Maybe you swore, I'm going to give up sugar. Maybe it was a sinful pattern. Maybe it was just an old way of thinking. Maybe it was a version of yourself that God has already been trying to bring you out of, and yet somehow, after the dust settles, after the prayer is answered, after the door closes, after you finally get some distance between you and that thing, you start looking back. You start remembering what was familiar. You start questioning whether leaving was the right decision at all. You start missing what you once begged God to free you from. And today, I want to talk about that because sometimes the hardest part of freedom is not getting out. Sometimes the hardest part is learning how not to go back. Did you hear what I just said? I said sometimes the hardest part of freedom is not getting out. Sometimes the hardest part is learning how not to go back. So if you've ever wondered, why do I keep going back to what God delivered me from? Why do I still want that? Why do I still need that? And I know God delivered me from it. This episode is for you. Before I proceed, I want you to take a moment, if you haven't subscribed, to do that so the algorithm can push this podcast to those people who need it the most. I want to give you 3 reasons why I feel like you keep going back. 3 reasons why sometimes we all go back. Point number 1, familiarity can feel safer than freedom. See, one reason we go back is because what is familiar can feel safer to us than what is new, even when the familiar thing is unhealthy. Oh, wow. Even when the thing that's familiar tried to destroy us, and even when the thing that is familiar had us bound, you can become so accustomed to dysfunction that peace now feels strange. You can become so used to chaos that stability can feel boring. You can become so comfortable with an old mindset that a new way of thinking can sometimes feel uncomfortable. You can even become so familiar with a sinful pattern that obedience sometimes feels harder than being bound. And that is exactly why Israel kept talking about Egypt even after God brought them out. See, Egypt represented bondage. Egypt represented oppression. Egypt represented everything God was delivering them from. Remember, they prayed for freedom. Remember, They prayed for deliverance. Egypt represents everything God was delivering them from. But when the wilderness got uncomfortable, they start remembering what was familiar. Not because Egypt was good, because we all know Egypt wasn't good to them, but because Egypt was something that they knew. And sometimes what we know feels easier than what God is trying to teach us. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes what we know feels easier than what God is teaching us, even if what we know is bondage, oppression, or dysfunction. But does this look like? This looks like going back to an unhealthy relationship because loneliness feels worse than dysfunction. Now, I don't know who can relate to this, but have you ever broken up with a guy or a girl and you said, I'm never going back to them, and they text you or they slide in your DM and you respond? You know they weren't good for you. They weren't good for you. They weren't good to you. They made you cry. They broke your heart. But for some reason, you are still attached to that person. For some reason, that person's living rent free in your head. I think we've all been there if we're honest. But sometimes letting that go can feel worse than we felt when we were in it. And if you can relate to that feeling, then you know exactly what I'm talking about in this episode. Sometimes it can look like returning to a toxic environment because starting over feels scary. This statement makes me think about the guy or the girl who just got out of jail. And instead of them changing their friends, they go back to the same environment. They go back and hang with the same people and end up doing the same activity. And more often than not, those same people end up back in jail because they return to the same toxic environment that got them caught up because changing and starting over felt too scary. They wanted to go back to what was familiar. It could look like falling back into an addiction because the cravings felt familiar. How many people said, Ooh, I'm going to stop drinking soda. I'm going to stop drinking sweet tea. I'm going to break up with Lil Debbie because she ain't good for me. How many of you say I'm gonna break up with Krispy Kreme? Me and Krispy Kreme need to have a falling out because me and Krispy Kreme ain't good to me. Krispy Kreme ain't good for me. And especially when that sign says, hot now, you definitely like your car has a mind of its own and it wants to turn into that drive-through. But that craving for that sugar, that addiction, feels familiar. And that's why it's so hard for people to lose weight. It's not that they're weak, it's just the cravings can sometimes pull you and cause you to eat something. You will be holding it in your hand and you said, Now I know I said I wasn't going to eat any more of these donuts, and you find one in your hand because it's easier to go back to the familiar even if it's hurting us. It could look like repeating the same sinful habit because obedience requires discipline. It could be the guy who says, I'm through going to a strip club. I'm through watching corn, and I'm just done with that because God is in me, and he that is in me is more than he that is in the world. Yes, yes, yes. That's his faith talking. But he finds himself repeating the same habits because he hasn't created the discipline to sustain him through the addiction. It could look like returning to fear because faith feels uncertain. It could look like going back to an old mindset because renewing your mind takes work. And I don't want to do all that. I just want to keep thinking like I've been thinking and confessing something different. I want you to hear me though. Familiar doesn't mean safe, and familiar definitely does not mean it's God. So sometimes God will bring you into an unfamiliar place because he's teaching you how to live free. Did you hear what I just said? I said it's uncomfortable. Guy, it's uncomfortable, sis, but you know what? Sometimes God will bring you into an unfamiliar place because he's stretching you, because he's teaching you how to live free. Just 3 points. Point number 2, your behavior can change before your mind does. Sometimes God brings you out of something physically, but mentally, you still living there. You left the relationship, but you're still thinking like a rejected person. You stopped the habit, but you still believe you need it to cope. You left that negative, toxic environment, but you still carry the fear that you learned when you were there. You stopped doing the sinful behavior, but your mind is still entertaining the same thoughts that fed that addiction. You can come out of Egypt and still think like a slave. That's why Romans 12:2 tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. See, transformation requires more than changing your location. It requires changing your thinking. Isn't that good? Well, Minister Yo, how do I know if I have an old mindset? If you have an old mindset, you can sound like this. I'll always be this way. I can't change. I can't lose weight. Nobody really loves me. Nobody want to marry me with 6 kids. Nobody want to marry me. I have a record. I need this to feel better. I need this to calm my nerves. I always mess things up. This is just who I am. I'll never be free. I'll never be whole. I'll never be happy. I'll never have a man who won't cheat. I'll never have a woman who will love me and not my money. And if you continue believing what bondage taught you, eventually your behavior will try to follow your thinking. And that's why renewing your mind is not optional. Renewing your mind is a part of discipleship. Renewing your mind is a part of spiritual growth. And renewing your mind is how we stay free. Just 3 points. Point number 3, freedom requires a new life, not just an exit. See, this is where many people struggle. We focus so much on what we're leaving that we don't build anything new. You stop hanging around the old crowd but you don't build healthy community. You stop the habit, but you don't replace it with something that gives you life. You end the relationship, but you don't address the loneliness underneath it. You end the relationship, but you don't block the number. You don't erase the number. You end the relationship, but you don't ignore the person when they try to reach back out. You stop feeding the addiction, but you don't deal with the pain that made you reach for it in the first place. You decide you aren't going to live in fear anymore, but you don't build your faith. And when you leave a vacuum, old patterns are always waiting to come back. Freedom requires replacement. I must say that again for the person way in the back. In order to be free, in order to stay free, it requires you to replace some things. But what does that mean, Minister Yolanda? That means you may need new spiritual disciplines. That means you may need new boundaries, new friendships, new routines, new ways to respond to stress, a new way of thinking, a new accountability partner. You may need a deeper prayer life. You may need more time in the Word, but you also may need a willingness to obey God even when it feels uncomfortable. You don't just need to come out. You need to become. You need to become wiser, disciplined, spiritually mature, more aware, stronger in your faith. And you need to become the person who no longer fits where God brought you from. So I want you to sit with these three questions this week. I don't want you to rush through them. I want you to really be honest with yourself because you can't change what you're not aware of. Question number one, what has God already brought me out of that I still feel tempted to return to? This is just between you and the Holy Spirit. So be completely honest because you can't grow, you can't get better if you're in denial. Be specific. It could be a person, it could be a habit, it could be a mindset, it could be some sort of sin, it could be an environment, an addiction, it could be a way of coping, whatever it is. Write it down in your journal. Question number two. What does that old place still give me emotionally? Because, see, there's a reason why you want to go back to the familiar. It was giving you something emotionally. And in order to be free, we have to find that in the new place, in a healthy way, not in a dysfunctional way. So, does it give you comfort? Does eating those donuts give you comfort? Donuts is a comfort food. When you break up, why do women automatically go get ice cream? Ice cream is a comfort food. Cake, ice cream, cookies, those are comfort foods. They give you comfort. But what does that old place still give me emotionally is the question. Does it give you attention? Does it give you familiarity? Does it give you an escape? Are you smoking weed to escape your problems? Are you getting drunk every day to escape your problems? Is it giving you validation? Are you having sex before marriage because it's making you feel validated? Oh, I know that I'm something special because this man wants my body, because this man comments on my body. It's giving me validation. Well, we need to help you find validation another way. Is it helping you stay in control? Is it just giving you temporary relief? What is this old place giving me emotionally? That's the question. See, sometimes we can't fully release something until we understand why we keep reaching for it. You're going to never kick your soda habit if you don't understand why you reach for it. You're going to never kick that donut habit. You're never going to get Little Debbie out your house if you don't first address why are you reaching for it. Question 3, just 3 questions. What do I need to build in my life so I don't have to keep going back? Now that's the question. Maybe you need a new accountability partner, one who's going to hold you accountable. Maybe you need boundaries. Maybe you need a healthier community. Maybe you need a community. Maybe you need to renew your mind in that area. What does the word say about that area? Maybe you need to stop entertaining thoughts that pull you backwards. When those thoughts come, cast them down. Don't entertain them, because the more you entertain negative thoughts, it pulls you in. Maybe you need a stronger prayer life. Maybe you need to pray more than once a week on Sundays at church. Maybe you need to finally deal with the wound underneath the behavior. That's big. Because sometimes we find ourselves acting out and we don't know where did that come from. Why did I blow up? When they said that trigger word, oh my gosh, I went all the way to the left. It's because there's a wound that hasn't been healed. And it causes you to act out every time something triggers that wound. But maybe you need to finally deal with it. Whatever it is, we're going to ask God to show us what needs to be changed. Because freedom is not just about what you leave behind. True freedom is about what you build on the other side. Hey, if today's episode made you realize that there may be some areas in your life where you are still struggling to stay free, I want to encourage you to start with awareness. Sometimes we keep repeating a pattern because we've never slowed down long enough to understand what is underneath it. I created a free resource to help you begin doing exactly that. You can find that link in the show notes. Take some time with it. Be honest with yourself and invite God into the process. You can also visit my Stan.store at Stan.store/YolandaBethea to view all my current resources and offers. Good news. I also want to let you know that my new book, Free Indeed, is almost ready for release. This book goes deeper into emotional and spiritual patterns that keep us bound and how we can begin to become the people that God created us to be. And I'll be sharing more about that real soon. Before I go, though, remember this. God brought you out for a reason. You don't have to keep returning to what He has already delivered you from. You can learn a new way. You can think differently. You can live differently. You can grow. You can mature. And by the grace of God, you can stay free. This is the Ask Minister Your podcast. Keep growing in God. Keep choosing obedience. And keep moving forward, and I'll talk to you on the other side. Bye for now.